The wind howled across the dry plains that evening, carrying dust and memory in its restless breath. A single bulb flickered on the porch of a small wooden house at the edge of Willow Creek, where Emma Hayes tucked her little boy into bed and whispered a quiet prayer that tonight would be peaceful. She had built a fragile world with her own two hands, a world of routine, safety, and silence ever since her husband left 5 years ago. Love, she had decided, was a storm she couldn't afford again. But fate had its own way of testing promises. That night, as the wind rattled the shutters, she heard the slow crunch of boots on gravel. Her heart froze. Few men ever came this far from town, especially after dark. She reached for the old shotgun near the door, her pulse echoing louder than the storm, until the knock came deep, deliberate, and heavy with something she couldn't name. When she opened the door, the lamplight revealed a tall man in a dust-stained hat, his face shadowed and rough like the land itself. His eyes, cold, tired, and searching, met hers for a long moment. He didn't smile. "Evenin'," he said, voice low and cracked. "My horse went lame a mile back. I just need a place to rest a while." Emma's grip on the door tightened. She had heard stories about this man, Jackson Cole, the rancher who lost everything in a fire and turned mean from it. Folks in town called him dangerous, a man who carried more ghosts than friends. He looked like trouble, the kind that smelled of whiskey and regret. "You can wait out in the barn," she said quickly, her voice trembling though she stood her ground. Jackson tilted his head, rain glistening on his hat brim. "Ain't a skin for much, ma'am. Just warmth and a place to dry off." Her little boy stirred inside, calling softly for his mama, and that sound hardened her decision. She shook her head and whispered, "Please, don't come inside." Something flickered in Jackson's eyes. Pride, maybe pain, but he only nodded once. "Didn't mean to scare you, ma'am. I'll take the barn." He turned without another word, disappearing into the storm. Emma closed the door, her breath shaking. But as the thunder rolled, she couldn't shake the image of that lonely cowboy walking into the rain, carrying his sorrow like a cross. Something in her chest ached, a whisper she didn't want to hear. "You locked out more than a stranger tonight." Outside, under the angry sky, Jackson looked back once at the flickering light in her window, and for the first time in years, he felt the sting of something he thought long dead, hope. The rain poured through the night, tapping against the windows like old secrets begging to be heard. Emma sat by the dying fire, pretending to read, but her eyes kept wandering to the window, where faint lightning illuminated the barn in the distance. She imagined Jackson Cole in there, soaked, cold, and wrapped in the same silence that haunted her nights. She told herself it didn't matter, that he had chosen his path long ago, that the world had already hardened him beyond repair. Yet something about his voice, that cracked tone edged with loneliness, lingered in her chest like a half-forgotten song. She rose once, twice, pacing, whispering to herself that kindness didn't mean weakness. But she didn't open the door, not yet. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds, soft and gold. Her boy, Tommy, ran to the window and squealed, "Mama, there's a man with a horse out there." Emma's stomach tightened as she stepped outside, her boots sinking into the wet ground. Jackson stood near the barn, trying to mend his saddle strap, his hat low, shoulders broad, the image of a man built from hard years and harder choices. He looked up as she approached, eyes narrowed not in anger, but in habit, the look of someone who'd forgotten how to expect kindness. "Mornin'," he said quietly. "Didn't mean to overstay. Just fixing this up before I go." Emma folded her arms, trying to sound distant. "You'll find better help in town." He gave a faint, crooked smile. "Town's full of folks who talk too much. You're the first person who told me no without hating me for it." That answer caught her off guard. Before she could speak, Tommy came running with a slice of bread, holding it out to the stranger. "Mama says no one should leave hungry," the boy said innocently. Jackson hesitated, then took it gently, nodding. "You got a good mama," he murmured. Emma felt her heart twist at the sight, the way this rough, feared cowboy softened before her son, the way he thanked her without words. For a moment, something fragile sparked between them, something neither could admit nor stop. When he finally mounted his horse, Emma called out, "Jackson." He turned, waiting. She hesitated, then said softly, "There's coffee on the stove. If you want to warm up before you go." His eyes met hers, and for the first time, there was warmth in them, hesitant, surprised, human. "You sure about that, ma'am?" he asked. Emma swallowed, a faint smile trembling on her lips. "Just don't make me regret it." He tipped his hat, a ghost of a smile touching his face. "Wouldn't dream of it." As he led his horse toward the porch, Emma realized that sometimes healing didn't come from slamming doors, but from daring to open them, even if just a crack. The smell of coffee drifted through the small wooden house as Jackson stepped hesitantly onto the porch, his boots dripping rainwater onto the old boards. Emma watched him from the kitchen, her heart thudding softly against her ribs, unsure whether she was inviting comfort or chaos. He looked out of place inside her home, a man carved by loss standing in a space built from tenderness. His eyes wandered over the walls, the simple furniture, the drawings Tommy had pinned near the window. "You've got yourself a fine place," he said quietly, removing his hat, his voice low like a confession. Emma poured the steaming coffee into a chipped mug and slid it across the table. "It's small," she replied, "but it's safe," he nodded, wrapping his hands around the mug as if it were the first warmth he'd felt in years. For a while, silence hung between them, not awkward, but heavy with unspoken things. "I heard what they say about you in town," Emma said finally, her tone cautious. Jackson's eyes darkened, a shadow passing through them. "They say I'm mean, don't they?" She hesitated, then gave a small nod. He let out a bitter chuckle. "Guess it's easier to call a man mean than broken." The words hit her, deeper than she expected. She saw it now, the loneliness behind his sharp edges, the sorrow behind the stories. "People change," she said softly. "Not everyone believes that," he replied, staring into his coffee like it held answers he'd lost. Just then, Tommy came running in, his small boots thumping against the floor. "Mama, can Mr. Cowboy fix my toy horse?" The innocence in the boy's voice pulled a rare smile from Jackson's face. "Let's see what we got here," he said, kneeling beside him. Watching the once feared cowboy carefully glue together a broken toy, Emma felt something stir inside her, not fear, not pity, but an ache she thought she'd buried. When he finished, Tommy beamed. "Thanks, mister." Jackson tipped his hat slightly. "You take care of your horse now, partner." As Tommy ran off laughing, Jackson rose, his gaze meeting Emma's in a silence that spoke louder than words. "I should go," he murmured, setting the mug down. Storm's easing. She wanted to stop him, to say something that would break the wall still standing between them, but the words wouldn't come. At the door, he paused, hand on the frame, rainlight spilling around him. "You were kind to me," he said softly. "Folks don't forget kindness." Then he stepped out into the fading storm, leaving behind the faint scent of rain and the echo of something Emma hadn't felt in years, hope wrapped in heartbreak. She watched him disappear down the muddy road, whispering to herself, "Please, don't stay gone too long." Days passed, and the rain gave way to bright skies over Willow Creek. But Emma's heart felt strangely quiet. The routine of her mornings returned, feeding the chickens, patching clothes, tending to the small garden. Yet there was a new emptiness woven into the rhythm. Every time the wind brushed against the window, or a horse trotted down the distant road, she found herself looking up, hoping for the sight of a worn hat and a crooked smile. Jackson Cole had been gone less than a week, but somehow, his presence lingered like the faint scent of smoke after a fire. She told herself it was foolish, that she'd only offered kindness out of decency, not affection. But when night came and Tommy slept, she caught herself staring at the barn, remembering the way he had fixed that little wooden horse, with hands rough enough to break the world, yet gentle enough to mend something small and precious. One afternoon, as Emma carried a basket of laundry to the line, she noticed hoofprints near the gate, fresh, heavy, and deep. Her heart leapt. She turned, and there he was, leaning against the fence, hat tilted low, eyes watching her quietly. "Didn't mean to sneak up on you," Jackson said, his voice softer than she remembered. "Just thought I'd return the favor." She smiled faintly, unable to hide the warmth in her chest. "What favor would that be?" He nodded toward the porch. "You gave me shelter when no one else would. Figured I'd bring you something in return." From his saddlebag, he pulled out a small bag of flour and a tin of coffee. "Got these in town. Didn't seem right leaving you empty-handed." Emma hesitated, her throat tightening with something she couldn't name. "You didn't have to, I know." he said. But I wanted to. The way he said it made her forget the space between them. The years, the pain, the fear. Tommy ran out then, shouting happily, "Mr. Cowboy's back," and threw his arms around Jackson's leg. For a man so used to solitude, Jackson looked startled, then smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. "Hey there, partner," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. Emma watched, her heart softening like the soil after rain. For the first time, she didn't tell him to stay away. Instead, she found herself saying, "There's stew on the stove if you're hungry." Jackson looked at her for a long moment, his voice barely above a whisper. "You sure you?" That night, the scent of stew filled the small house, and for the first time in years, laughter brushed against its walls. Jackson sat at the table, hat resting beside him, while Tommy talked endlessly about his school, his toy horse, and the dreams only children dared to share. Emma watched them quietly, her hands busy but her heart still. It felt strange, good, yet dangerous, to see this man, once feared by the town, sitting like he belonged there. When Tommy went to bed, the silence between them grew thicker, heavier, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but charged. Jackson glanced at her from across the table. "You don't owe me dinner, you know," he said softly. "I didn't come for charity." Emma smiled faintly. "And I didn't cook for guilt. Maybe I just wanted company." He studied her face for a long moment, as if memorizing every shadow and line time had drawn there. "You remind me of someone," he murmured. "Someone I once loved before everything burned." Her breath caught. "What happened?" His eyes lowered. "Fire took her, took the ranch, took the man I was, too." The pain in his voice was raw, stripped of pride, and Emma's chest ached for him. "Maybe that man isn't gone," she whispered. "Maybe he's just been waiting for the right reason to come back." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Jackson reached out, his rough hand brushing against hers, gentle, uncertain. The world seemed to still around them. But just as the warmth between them grew, a harsh knock rattled the door. Emma jumped, pulling her hand away. Jackson's jaw tightened. Outside, voices echoed, men from town. "Emma, you in there?" It was Sheriff Duggan, stern and suspicious. "We saw Cole's horse out front. You all right?" Emma glanced at Jackson, who stood slowly, his expression unreadable. "You should let me handle this," he said. But she shook her head. "No, you stay." She opened the door halfway. The sheriff peered inside, eyes narrowing. "You know who you're harboring, don't you? That man's trouble." Emma's voice was calm but firm. "He's just a man passing through, Sheriff, and he's done nothing wrong." Duggan's stare moved between them, the tension thick enough to choke on. "You're making a mistake," he muttered before turning away. When the sound of hooves faded, Emma shut the door, her hands trembling. "They think I'm foolish," she said quietly. Jackson looked at her, eyes softening. "Maybe you are," he said, stepping closer. "But sometimes, foolish hearts are the only ones brave enough to care." She looked up at him, her fear melting into something stronger. The storm outside had passed, but inside, another was just beginning, one that neither of them wanted to escape. Morning came quiet but heavy, the kind of silence that carried whispers from the night before. The town already knew. Emma could feel it in the air, the eyes that lingered too long at the market, the voices that fell to a hush when she walked past. Word had spread fast, the widow who let the outlaw inside. She tried to ignore it, focusing on chores and on Tommy's laughter. But beneath it all was a trembling fear she couldn't name. Jackson had stayed the night in the barn, his presence both comfort and danger. When she brought him breakfast, he was sitting on a hay bale, staring at the morning light through the open doors. "They're talking, aren't they?" he said before she could speak. Emma nodded. "They'll always talk." He looked at her then, eyes tired but kind. "You don't deserve their judgment, Emma. I ain't worth the trouble they'll bring you." She stepped closer, shaking her head. "You're worth more than you think." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and for a moment, neither breathed. Then Jackson stood, his voice rough. "You don't understand. The sheriff ain't wrong to hate me. I done things I ain't proud of. I wasn't always the man you see now." Emma's throat tightened. "We've all done things we wish we hadn't. That's why we get second chances." But he turned away, fists clenching. "Not me. Not after what I lost." He walked out into the open field, the wind catching his coat, and she watched him go, a hollow ache spreading through her chest. Later that day, the sheriff returned, not with anger but warning. "Emma, that man brings trouble. Folks are uneasy. Best you send him away before things turn bad." She said nothing, only nodded as he rode off, the words slicing deep. That night, when Jackson came back from town, Dustin's silence clinging to him, she met him on the porch. "They want you gone," she whispered. He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. "Figured they would." Her heart cracked. "So you'll leave?" His voice was steady but soft. "If I stay, they'll hurt you." "Emma, I can't let that happen." Tears glimmered in her eyes, catching the lantern light. "You think walking away will protect me? You're wrong. It'll just break me." Jackson's jaw tightened, torn between duty and desire. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch trembling. "You're the first good thing I've seen in years," he said hoarsely. "That's why I can't ruin you." Then he turned, the sound of his boots fading into the night, leaving Emma standing in the doorway. The same doorway where she once begged him not to come inside. Only this time, her heart was the one left out in the cold. The next morning, sunlight poured through the small cracks in the wooden walls, warm and golden, chasing away the shadows that had lived there too long. Emma woke to the soft sound of movement in the kitchen, the clatter of pans, the low hum of a man's voice. For a moment she thought she was dreaming, but when she walked in, there he was, Jackson Cole, pouring coffee, his shirt damp from the rain, but his eyes steady and alive. He looked up at her with that faint, crooked smile she had missed every day since he left. "Hope you don't mind," he said gently. "Figured it was time. I made breakfast for once." She stood there for a heartbeat, then smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "It's about time someone else burned the eggs," she teased. They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that felt like healing. Tommy came running in, squealing with delight at the sight of Jackson. "You came back," he shouted, wrapping his arms around the cowboy's leg. Jackson knelt, hugging the boy close. "Told you I'd see you again, partner," he said softly. Emma watched, her eyes glistening. This man who had once carried nothing but pain now looked at her son like he was something precious, something that mattered. The day passed peacefully, filled with small things, laughter, shared chores, stories from the past. Yet, as the sun dipped low, Emma knew they still had one truth left unspoken. Out on the porch, beneath a sky painted gold and crimson, Jackson finally turned to her. "You know they'll still talk," he said quietly. "The town, the sheriff, everyone. They won't understand." Emma met his gaze, her voice steady and sure. "Let them talk. They didn't live what we lived. They didn't lose what we lost." He took a slow breath, his hand brushing hers. "You sure you're ready for this?" She nodded. "I stopped being afraid the moment I opened that door last night." He smiled then, real and warm, the kind that reached his soul. "Guess that makes two of us." They stood together, watching the horizon fade into dusk, the gentle hum of crickets rising around them. For the first time, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of promise, of beginnings. Jackson slipped his arm around her, and she leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. The wind whispered through the fields, soft and forgiving, as if blessing what it had once tried to tear apart. In that quiet, Emma realized that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about finding the courage to open the door, even when every fear told you not to. And now, as stars began to bloom across the darkening sky, she whispered the words she'd once spoken with fear, but now filled with peace. "Please, don't come inside." Then she smiled, looking up at him, and added softly, "Years passed quietly in Willow Creek, the seasons painting their slow poetry across the land. The house that once stood alone at the edge of the plains now felt alive, laughter spilling through its open windows, the scent of coffee and bread mixing with the morning air." Emma sat on the porch one golden afternoon, the sun soft against her skin, watching Tommy race across the field with a wooden horse in his hand, the same one Jackson had fixed long ago. He had grown tall now, strong and kind, carrying the same quiet strength that Jackson had once tried to hide. Inside, the low hum of a man's voice drifted through the doorway, steady and familiar. Jackson stepped out moments later, gray now streaking his hair, but his eyes still carrying that same deep warmth that had once melted her fears. "You still sit in that same chair every evening," he teased gently, wiping his hands on a cloth. Emma smiled. "And you still pretend you can fix everything that's broken." He chuckled softly. "Maybe I can't fix the world, but I can make sure you never have to face it alone." She reached for his hand, their fingers locking together like pieces that had always belonged. Around them, the land was peaceful, the sky vast and forgiving, the same land that had once been filled with storms and silence. Life had not been perfect. There had been hardships, sickness, worry, and long days that tested their faith. But through every trial, they had learned that love was not about avoiding pain. It was about finding someone who made the pain worth bearing. Emma looked at Jackson, her heart full. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked softly. He smiled, nodding. "Every day. The night you told me not to come inside. I thought it was the end. Never knew it'd be the beginning." She laughed quietly, her eyes glistening. "Maybe God knew we both needed saving." He squeezed her hand. "Maybe we still do, every day." The wind rustled the wheat fields, carrying with it the echo of the past, the rain, the thunder, the fear, but now all of it felt distant, forgiven. Tommy called from across the yard, his voice bright and young. "Supper's ready." Jackson rose and offered Emma his hand. "Come on, Mrs. Cole," he said with a grin. "We best not keep the cook waitin'." She took his hand, her smile soft and sure. Together they walked toward the house, the same house where pain once lived, but where love had chosen to stay. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in gold, Emma glanced back one last time at the porch, whispering to the wind, "You can come inside now." The words floated away, carried into the endless quiet, not as a warning this time, but as an invitation to peace.